all the way through this issue and any issue that we've faced where suddenly our MPs have been in the spotlight, regardless of the substance that's brought them there, we have always been concerned about ensuring that the well-being of our MPs sits first and foremost. And you will have heard that in the statements that I made. We will look to try and seek resolution to these issues this week in order to give a pathway forward. But front and centre will always be the well-being of our staff, but also the well-being of our MPs.
There are serious mental health issues within your caucus.
Look, our job is to always make sure that we have wraparound support for our caucus members. Sorry?
Do you agree those mental health issues are present in your caucus?
I am very clear that the support we provide for our caucus has to be consistent and has to meet what is a very high-pressured environment. I believe we do that. Is this a tough place to be? Yes, and that's why we have, for instance, ensured that in this new intake, we have professional supervision on offer, we have management coaching on offer, professional development on offer, and I can tell you that is a vast improvement on what I've seen in this place over the last 10 years.
What do you mean that you'll be looking for resolution? What do you mean that you're looking for
Jason,
resolution?
if you don't mind, I'll come in and then I'll come to you.
Were those original complaints against Gaurav Sharma ever substantiated, or were the staffers' words just taken and that was that?
And so, look, I do want to be careful here because here we get into the details of employment relationships. But we have a duty within this place now as a result of the Francis Review and in trying to ensure that in our employment relationships we're looking after all parties. There are processes now that we use to either, if it's escalated to formal interventions, to do that, but otherwise there are other options that are available to simply ensure that the working environment for a staff member is safe and that MPs have the support they need to be the best possible managers. I'm confident from what I've seen that those tools were being used appropriately.
What do you mean
If I may. Yeah, Imogen, and then I'll come to you, Jason.
Investigating Duncan Webb and Kieran McAnulty in terms of their actions in all of this as well?
Sorry, the first part of your question?
Investigating whether it was the Kieran McAnulty and Duncan Webb's actions and their part to play here.
As I've said, from what I've seen of the engagements, I have seen interventions that were used because concerns were raised by staff members around Gaurav's management of his team. It's clear that there wasn't always agreement that that was necessary by Gaurav, but that doesn't necessarily constitute what he has characterised as bullying. I've looked at those processes, I've looked at those interventions. Whilst I don't believe that they have substantiated his claims of bullying, we'll always look to improve our processes because some of them are new and are there to look after our staff, but ultimately to also look after our MPs.
You said you'd be looking to resolve this issue this week.
Yep.
What specifically will you be doing?
Look, all I'm referring to there is that when you have an issue of this nature, our caucus rules set out that it's actually for our caucus to resolve. Because, of course, our team relies just that, on our ability to work as a team and for us to use the caucus environment as a way to resolve issues of this nature. We haven't formally set down a meeting for this week because it is a recess. There isn't a standard caucus during this time, but we'll look to convene across the course of this week.
What is caucus going to do? What are they going to be deciding?
Again, I can't preempt that. That will ultimately...
What's actually going to be happening?
Well, actually, I can't. So what will occur is that caucus will convene over the course of this week. I cannot predetermine what they will decide as a team in terms of their response, but I do think it's in the best interest of all parties if they're able to do that this week so that we can bring some resolution to the situation. If I may, I've got two outlets asking at the same time. Jason, do you want me to go to you?
It's all right.
One last one and then I'll canvass around. There is enough time as well.
There's not a usual caucus meeting this weekend, so you're going to have to convene essentially a special caucus meeting for the rest of caucus to decide the fate. It's just very confusing. No,
it's not. And a recess caucus doesn't meet, but I've just said caucus will meet this week. So it's quite simple, and it's also not unusual. There will time to time be decision makings out of cycle that will cause us to meet. So I don't think it's unfair to call it anything other than simply responding to the fact that we've got something that gives rise for us to meet outside of what would usually be a sitting week. Oh, gosh, over the course of COVID, we touched base regularly in order to make sure caucus members had input into some of the things that were going on during COVID.
Post, Dr. Sharma.
Yeah, Jane, and then I'll come to you, Claire.
In his post, just put up in the last 10 minutes or so, he
Yep.
says that he sent the screenshots of MP's texts to your chief of staff.
That he what?
some time
Sorry,
ago.
could you repeat that for me?
He said that he sent the screenshots of texts from MPs that Mikey read out in terms of what he claims to be a number of MPs talking about their mental health concerns about being in trouble here, not really, effectively not wanting to come to work, and that he, Sharma, sent screenshots to your chief of staff. Have you at any stage been alerted, and are you happy that the communication between the Leader's Office, PMO, the whips, has been as it should have been?
Yes, I am. And I've seen some of that myself. What I have identified is, I think, some of the processes which are newly established after the result of the Francis review, which, if we can come back to the source of why this has occurred in the first place, staff members have raised concerns and raised their own issues about coming to work. And so we have an obligation that when that occurs, to make sure that we look after their wellbeing and work with MPs to make sure that they're the best employers that they can be. So we have that obligation. That is what has started this issue in the first place. So whilst, of course, I understand you're placing emphasis at this time on the MP in question, we have an obligation to look after the staff they employ as well. And so that has been the concern that's generated this issue in the first place. My view is that we can probably ensure that some of those processes could move more quickly. It is somewhat complicated by the fact that it has involved both parliamentary services, whips and MPs, but it probably is understandable that given that these are early days for these new processes, that they could do with some refinement, and we should be open to that.
Do you consider that he has breached the Labour Constitution's rules of conduct? Is that something that the caucus will specifically be looking at, and what communication is there with him, I suppose through the back channels, if any, with senior Labour Party members or other people brought in?
So here, I mean, one of the issues for me is that ultimately we have, and I'll speak to what is black and white, and the rest will be judgments for caucus. So what's black and white in our rules is the expectation that when there are issues that they're raised with whips, the leader or people nominated by the leader, and that then, if those issues remain unresolved, of course, caucus can be the ultimate place to raise concerns. So that's very clear. As I've already set out, those avenues have not always been used in this case. When it comes to what happened next, though, that's not something for me to predetermine here. That is something for caucus. And I am...
the party into disrepute, which is another rule.
That's
surely,
correct, it is.
There must be a strong case at this point for that element of the rules as well for caucus to consider.
So that will be what caucus will be considering, but I am going to allow them to consider it. It is for the caucus to determine. And one of the things I continue to be mindful of yes, in the traversing of this issue in the public domain, which has ultimately began with the article last Thursday, that does give me cause for the concern of the wellbeing of the MPs in question, but also of their team, of their staff members. That's why we have other processes to deal with these issues.
You're getting together this recess in person, and can you give us a
I
day
don't,
that
at this stage again, I've got no further details on that to share, other than the fact that I think it's in everyone's interest if we try and resolve it as soon as possible.
communication with Dr.
Again,
Sharma between the Labour Party and him at the
I
moment?
don't actually believe it's in anyone's best interest to get into the detail of those communications again, because actually I do have in my mind the well-being of all parties in this question.
Have you become aware of any other MPs who have similar concerns to those of Dr. Sharma
Around
the way that they've been treated by the Whip's office and the treatment of them, basically?
if you're asking about whether or not other staff feel they have been bullied, I have not had that raised with me, and I'll allow MPs who did comment when asked that they did not agree that this was a widespread issue. Yeah. Do you mind, Jason, if I may, I am going to canvass around, Jason, just because you had a few. Look.
Oh no, but just following up on Claire's, but have any MPs come to you and said that they agree with Dr. Sharma, they experienced something similar themselves at the hands of Mr. Regan and
I have had no one claim that they feel they have been bullied by our whips. Keep in mind, everyone in this place will know the role of whips. They determine people's leave, when they need to fill in on select committees, when they need house duty. There will be times when there won't necessarily be agreement over their decisions. We do always need to make sure that they have avenues to raise those disputes when they arise. I see that as very different to whether or not people believe they're being bullied.
Just to go back to the, just
Look,
to go
I'll
back
let
to
you finish
the,
there,
just to
yeah.
go back to the kind of guts of the issue, is the
Yes.
thing at stake here that Dr. Sharma was basically, as a boss, told to pull his socks up, and in being told to do so, he has basically said, well, that's bullying. Is that a fair summation?
Essentially, yes, there have been issues that have been raised. There have been interventions by the whips and parliamentary services on those issues. He hasn't agreed with their perspective. But again, our duty of care has to be both to the staff and also to MPs.
Minister, do you think that there is a place, though, for an independent entity or organisation
Yes.
for MPs to go to if they feel that communication with the whips has broken down? Because you're speaking with your uplink manager, and if that communication breaks down, there's no other avenue for an MP to go to.
First thing I'd say is you're right, there does need to be alternatives, as there is in any workplace, because in any workplace from time to time you will have issues that need to be resolved. Firstly, though, the next rung up would be probably the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party and the Leader of the Labour Party, Calvin Davis, and myself. Whilst a member of my staff was approached about 6 months ago, I never have been. And so that is one of the options, yes. But you raise a good point. The Conduct Commissioner is something that Parliament as a whole has been working on. Now, ultimately, one of the drivers for that has been a recognition of the power imbalance that sits between MPs and others. That was one of the issues we were seeking to work on and intervene around. But yes, I do believe there is such a role, but there are actually a couple of other steps in between as well. And we support the creation of that role.
Down though on that communication.
Yeah, so if it's unable to be
no union for the MP to go to.
So there is, some of our MPs do actually belong to unions, but there is the ability after the whip, there's the deputy leader, there's the leader, and there's caucus. So there are avenues that each team will have that should be utilised. But I do agree, having that extra person will only benefit this environment, and it's one of the reasons why we support it.
So have you actually spoken to Dr. Sharma since Friday?
We have exchanged some communication, but again, I don't think it's in anyone's best interest to traverse that in great detail.
Just ask how you have dismissed the allegations made against Kieran McNulty, which are quite...
I've said that I haven't seen anything to substantiate them because I have looked through and examined some of what has occurred.
Okay, so you have done some sort of investigation. Yeah. You're happy to stand by Mr.
I wouldn't call it that, but again, here I would say that I can see that there has been a disagreement, but I haven't seen evidence that suggests or substantiates those allegations. And I've given an example. There's been accusations made around the use of resources, which has clearly been dismissed.
Yeah, that's not really the heart of the question about Kieran McNulty.
No, what's at the heart of the question is whether we were doing enough to support his staff.
Yeah, sure,
that sits at the heart of the question.
He's obviously earned a promotion, so you've obviously been quite pleased with Mr. McNulty's conduct. Do you think at stages he's strayed towards being sort of an old school whip or
I've seen no evidence of that, but I've also described the job of the whips and also the job that they have within Caucus, and that's always been my experience. There will from time to time be disagreements, but we have mechanisms for that too. Okay, I'll come back. Mikey, Imogen, Jason, I know that there's great enthusiasm there, but we've still got time.
The caucus meeting later this week, is it a foregone conclusion that Gaurav Sharma is gone, or do you believe the relationship is salvageable?
I will absolutely leave that to our caucus. That is what our rules set out. That is the best place for us to discuss and determine the next steps together. Imogen, then Jason.
Just those, again, going back to those complaints, the original complaints made from his staff about his conduct, were those ever substantiated or backed up in any way, or did you just take the complaints and then move in to give management training before finding out what it actually
Well, keep in mind that the whole point of the Francis Review was to create steps for early intervention. Our whole goal as a team is to make sure that we support all MPs, some of which will not have had experience managing staff before, support them as early as possible when issues arise so that you don't then enter a situation where things escalate and you end up in a formal process. So it was about early intervention, supporting our MP as early as possible when issues arose. Unfortunately, that wasn't always taken on board as being constructive, and there have been repeat issues.
The issues investigated.
But as I've already set out, some of the interventions that existed here were based on early interventions, stopping the escalation of what were issues that were being raised.
Are you able to just, you use the phrase
Jason.
judgment for caucus, and I'm just really wanting for you to paint a picture of what's going to, without breaching manuals and rules and stuff, what's actually going to be happening in that room. Is Dr. Sharma going to be invited to defend himself? What sort of decisions will caucus be making in this, quote, judgment?
Of course, it does not have the formality of a courtroom. It is a caucus. So we will essentially have the opportunity to come together as a team. It does not constitute a full caucus unless everyone is invited. So of course, for natural justice, Gaurav Sharma would be a part of that meeting. But essentially, it's an opportunity then for the team to discuss what the next steps would be.
Yeah, but what does that mean in practice? Is he going to stand up and say, this is what I think, and then Mr. McAnulty is going to be invited to speak as well?
If you don't mind, I will keep the process that we choose to use as a team to within the room.
Expelling him from the Labour Party an option?
Well, again, I'm not going to predetermine any of the outcomes when it is ultimately a call for his team. We've been very focused since, of course, we were privileged enough to be elected in 2020 with this enlarged team to make sure that our focus is to be unified, to work collectively and collaboratively. And to date, we've done a pretty good job of doing that. I want to ensure that we continue to take that team approach into resolving this issue.